There are days when the pressure doesn't come from one direction, but from every side. Your mind feels under siege. Your heart feels weary. Your spirit feels surrounded. The enemy whispers, circumstances shout, and peace feels distant.
But hear this clearly today. Being surrounded does not mean you are defeated.
When you feel attacked on all sides, heaven is still standing on your side. What looks like an ambush is often the setup for a breakthrough. This is not the moment to retreat. This is the moment to pray. Prayer and motivational message. Father God, we come before you this morning acknowledging that some days feel heavier than others. There are days when discouragement presses in from the left, fear from the right, confusion from ahead, and regret from behind. But today we lift our eyes above the battlefield and fix them on you. When attacks come from all sides, remind us that you are not limited by direction, distance, or delay. You are the God who builds a hedge around your people. You are the shield that absorbs what was meant to destroy us. You are the fortress that cannot be breached. Lord, teach us not to fight spiritual battles with human strength. When words fail us, let faith speak. When emotions overwhelm us, let truth anchor us. When the noise grows louder, let your voice rise higher. We declare this morning that what comes against us will not consume us. What tries to break us will not define us. What surrounds us will not overtake us. Because you surround us with your presence. Strengthen the one who woke up tired today. Encourage the one who feels isolated. Stabilize the one whose faith feels shaken. And remind every listener that the battle may be intense, but the outcome is already settled. When the pressure is constant, help us stay consistent. When answers are delayed, help us remain devoted. When attacks are relentless, help us be relentless in prayer. We choose not to panic. We choose to pray. We choose not to quit. We choose to trust. We choose not to surrender to fear. We surrender to faith. There are moments in life when everything seems to be closing in at once. Pressure from responsibilities, resistance from people,
Opposition from circumstances, and doubt rising within your own mind. It feels like you're standing in the center of a storm with no clear escape route.
But here's the truth you must grab hold of immediately. Being surrounded does not mean being defeated. If anything, it often means you are positioned at a critical point where something significant is about to happen. The enemy does not waste energy attacking empty territory. The intensity of the pressure is often a reflection of the value of what you carry. Think about this. If defeat were already guaranteed, there would be no need for opposition. The fact that you are still standing, still breathing, still believing, even while surrounded, is evidence that the battle is not over. Surrounding pressure is not a signal to panic. It is a signal to pay attention. It means something in you is worth resisting. It means your progress has been noticed. It means your future is threatening the forces that want you stagnant. Here's the hook you need to catch this morning. Surrounded does not mean trapped unless you forget who surrounds you. When pressure comes from all sides, your perspective determines your posture. If you focus only on what you see around you, fear will take control. But when you lift your focus higher, you realize that what surrounds you is not greater than what stands with you. Opposition may be visible, loud, and persistent, but it is not ultimate. Many people assume that peace only exists when problems disappear, but real strength is revealed when peace stands firm in the middle of chaos. Being surrounded is often the birthplace of resilience. It's where shallow faith is exposed and deep trust is developed. This is where you learn that confidence is not built by comfort, but by confrontation. Pressure squeezes out what's really inside, and if faith is within you, faith will rise under pressure. Another hook you need to hear clearly. You are not surrounded because you are weak. You are surrounded because you are advancing. Resistance always meets momentum. The closer you move toward purpose, the louder the pushback becomes. That pushback is not a warning sign to retreat. It is confirmation that you are moving in the right direction. Retreat feels safe in the moment, but it delays growth. Standing firm feels difficult, but it produces strength you cannot gain any other way. Being surrounded also strips away false dependencies. When there is no obvious escape, no easy solution, no quick fix, you learn where your true source lies. That's when self-reliance gives way to surrender. And surrender gives birth to stability. You stop asking, how do I get out of this? And start declaring, I will stand through this. That shift alone changes the atmosphere. Here's another truth that disrupts fear. What surrounds you is temporary, but what sustains you is eternal. Circumstances change, pressure fades, attacks lose momentum, but the strength that carries you through remains. Being surrounded does not rewrite your destiny. It refines your character. It sharpens discernment. It strengthens endurance. It teaches you how to stand without applause, how to believe without evidence, how to remain steady when everything around you is shaking.
If you've ever wondered why the attacks seem coordinated, why problems show up back to back, why relief feels delayed, understand this: surrounding pressure often comes right before strategic breakthrough. When opposition converges, it's because something is aligning, and alignment always brings tension before release. You may feel surrounded, but you are not abandoned. You may feel pressured, but you are not powerless. You may feel overwhelmed, but you are not overtaken. The battle around you does not determine the outcome within you. What you choose to believe in the middle of being surrounded will shape what happens next. You can't fight what you can't see with tools that were never designed for the battle you're in. That's where many people get exhausted. They keep swinging in the natural while the real conflict is happening beneath the surface. The pressure you feel isn't always coming from people, schedules, or circumstances alone. Often what drains you the most is the unseen resistance working through what looks ordinary on the outside. When you try to handle a spiritual battle with human strength, frustration becomes inevitable. Natural effort has limits. Willpower runs out. Motivation fades. Logic reaches a dead end. That's why there are moments when no amount of planning, effort, or discipline seems to change the situation. You're doing everything you know to do, yet the heaviness remains. That's not a sign of failure. It's a signal that the strategy must shift. The battle has moved beyond what physical energy can fix, and it requires a different kind of strength. Spiritual battles don't announce themselves clearly. They disguise themselves as exhaustion, distraction, confusion, and discouragement. They show up as irritation over small things, loss of focus in important moments, and a quiet erosion of confidence. That's why fighting them with surface level solutions never brings lasting relief. You can rest your body and still feel heavy. You can change your environment and still feel unsettled. You can win arguments and still lose peace, because the real issue was never external. It was internal and spiritual. Human strength loves control. It wants quick results and visible progress. Spiritual strength, however, requires surrender before it produces stability. That's uncomfortable for many people because surrender feels like weakness when, in reality, it's alignment. When you stop relying solely on your own ability and begin drawing strength from a higher source, the pressure no longer dictates your response. You move from reacting to resisting, from striving to standing. There's a reason the fight intensifies when you decide to pray seriously. Prayer disrupts what the enemy depends on: silence, distraction, and self-reliance. When you pray, you're not just asking for help, you're shifting authority.
You're declaring that the battle does not belong to your emotions, your past, or your circumstances. You're acknowledging that this conflict requires power beyond personality, beyond discipline, beyond effort. Spiritual strength doesn't always remove the battle immediately, but it stabilizes you within it. You stop being tossed emotionally by every setback. You stop losing energy over things you can know. Key control. You gain discernment to recognize what deserves your attention and what is simply noise. That clarity alone becomes a weapon.
Instead of fighting everything, you fight effectively. One of the biggest mistakes people make is waiting until they are completely overwhelmed before turning to prayer.
By then, the pressure has already drained much of their strength. Prayer is not meant to be an emergency response. It is meant to be a daily reinforcement. When spiritual strength is built consistently, attacks lose their shock value. What once destabilized you becomes something you can stand against calmly. Spiritual battles also require patience because growth in strength is often invisible before it becomes evident. You don't always feel stronger immediately after praying, but you become steadier. You become less reactive. You become harder to intimidate. That quiet resilience is proof that something is shifting beneath the surface. The absence of immediate relief does not mean prayer is ineffective. It means the work is happening at a deeper level than emotions can measure. When you rely only on human strength, every attack feels personal. When you rely on spiritual strength, you recognize the pattern and refuse to internalize the pressure. You stop blaming yourself for every struggle and start standing with confidence. The battle may continue, but it no longer controls your identity, your peace, or your direction. Pressure has a way of revealing what we believe about power. When life presses hard, the natural response is to resist, complain, or search desperately for relief. But pressure does not have to be destructive. In the hands of faith, pressure becomes a place of transformation. What tries to weigh you down can become the very thing that lifts you up when it is redirected through prayer. Prayer does not deny the pressure, it reassigns its purpose. Man, people assume prayer is simply a request for escape, a plea for circumstances to change. But prayer is far more than an exit strategy. It is a transfer of weight. What you carry alone will eventually crush you. But what you place in prayer is no longer resting on your strength. The pressure does not disappear instantly, but it no longer sits on your shoulders the same way. Something shifts internally before anything changes externally. Pressure without prayer breeds panic. Pressure with prayer produces perspective. When you pray, you step out of emotional reaction and into spiritual alignment. You stop magnifying the size of the problem and start recognizing the limits of its authority. The problem may still exist, but it loses its power to define your thoughts, your mood, and your decisions. That is where pressure begins to lose its grip. There's a reason the mind often feels clearer after genuine prayer. Prayer organizes chaos. It brings scattered thoughts into order and reminds you of what truly matters. Under pressure, everything feels urgent. Everything feels heavy. Prayer separates what demands attention from what simply demands emotion. That separation alone restores strength. You are no longer fighting everything at once. You are standing focused. Pressure also has a way of forcing growth that comfort never will. In seasons of ease, prayer can become casual. Under pressure, prayer becomes intentional. Words carry weight. Silence becomes sacred. You stop performing and start being honest. That honesty unlocks power because it removes pretense. Real prayer is not about sounding strong. It is about becoming strong through surrender. When pressure is high, emotions fluctuate rapidly. One moment you feel hopeful, the next moment overwhelmed. Prayer stabilizes that emotional swing. It anchors you. You may still feel the weight, but you are no longer controlled. D by it. Stability is a form of strength that often goes unnoticed until it is needed most. Being able to remain steady under pressure is evidence that power is at work within you. Prayer also changes how pressure speaks to you. Instead of interpreting difficulty as failure, you begin to see it as a signal. Pressure signals growth. Pressure signals movement. Pressure signals that something valuable is being shaped. When you pray, you no longer ask, why is this happening to me? You begin to ask, what is being formed in me? That shift turns pressure into purpose. There is power in praying while the pressure remains. It teaches endurance. It develops trust beyond feelings. It proves that your faith is not dependent on immediate relief. This kind of prayer builds spiritual muscle. It strengthens your ability to stand without visible results. Over time, what once felt unbearable becomes manageable. Not because the pressure vanished, but because you became stronger. Pressure also exposes where you draw your strength from. When prayer becomes your response, you stop leaking energy through worry and frustration. You conserve strength by focusing on alignment instead of anxiety. That conservation is power. It allows you to move forward without being drained by every challenge. What once felt like a crushing force begins to function like resistance training. Each moment of pressure, when paired with prayer, adds strength you did not have before. You may not notice it immediately, but you carry yourself differently. You speak with more clarity. You respond with more restraint. You stand with more confidence. Pressure no longer controls you. It contributes to your growth. Most people believe the battle is won by a single powerful moment, a surge of passion, or an emotional breakthrough. But momentum is rarely broken by intensity alone. It is broken by consistency. The GRE. Addis victories are not usually the result of one dramatic stand, but of many quiet decisions to remain faithful when nothing seems to be changing. When pressure persists and results delay, consistency becomes the most threatening force against opposition. Momentum works in both directions. Just as discouragement grows when you repeatedly give in to fear, strength grows when you repeatedly choose faith. Every time you stand when it would be easier to retreat, you interrupt the pattern that opposition depends on. Resistance thrives on unpredictability, on moments when you are strong one day and absent the next. Consistency removes that advantage. It sends a clear message that you are not governed by feelings, but by commitment.
There are days when faith feels powerful and confident, and there are days when it feels quiet and heavy.
Consistency bridges the gap between those days. It keeps you grounded when emotions fluctuate. You may not feel courageous every morning, but choosing to pray anyway builds a rhythm that sustains you. That rhythm becomes a foundation. When attacks come, they meet structure, not chaos. One of the greatest misconceptions is that effectiveness requires motivation. In reality, motivation comes and goes, but discipline remains. Consistent faith is not loud, it is steady. It shows up when energy is low, when encouragement is absent, when progress feels invisible. That steady presence weakens opposition because it removes surprise. When you continue forward without dramatic change, you frustrate the forces that expect you to quit. Consistency also protects your mind. When faith practices are irregular, your thoughts become vulnerable to extremes. One setback can feel catastrophic. One delay can feel permanent. But consistency creates perspective. You learn to measure seasons instead of moments. You stop interpreting one hard day as failure. That mental stability is crucial because many battles are lost in thought long before they are lost in action. Every act of consistent faith, no matter how small, adds weight over time. A short prayer offered daily can be more powerful than a long prayer offered occasionally. A steady commitment to trust produces more strength than sporadic bursts of belief. Opposition loses momentum not when you react strongly, but when you respond steadily. Over time, the very resistance that once felt overwhelming begins to weaken simply because it cannot outlast your endurance. Consistency also changes how you view delay. Instead of seeing waiting as punishment, you begin to see it as preparation. Each day you remain faithful without visible results is a day your endurance grows. Endurance builds confidence that does not depend on outcomes. You learn that you can stand even when answers are slow. That realization alone robs opposition of one of its strongest weapons, impatience. There is a quiet authority that comes from consistency. You speak differently when you know you have stayed faithful. You carry yourself differently when you have not abandoned your position. Even when the battle continues, you are no longer shaken by its duration. Time becomes an ally instead of a threat. What once felt like prolonged pressure becomes proof that you can endure more than you imagined. Consistency also teaches discernment. You stop chasing every emotional high and start valuing spiritual depth. You recognize that progress is often subtle before it is visible. That awareness keeps you grounded. You are no longer distracted by comparisons or discouraged by others' timelines. You stay focused on your own path, confident that steady faith will produce lasting results. Opposition relies on fatigue, confusion, and discouragement. Consistency dismantles all three. It reduces fatigue by establishing rhythm. It eliminates confusion by reinforcing clarity. It weakens discouragement by proving that you can continue even when you don't feel strong. Over time, the momentum shifts. Once pushed against you, now struggles to keep up with you. Noise has a way of demanding attention. Fear speaks loudly, circumstances repeat themselves relentlessly, and negative thoughts echo until they feel authoritative. When pressure increases, the volume of everything around you seems to rise at the same time. That is how confusion gains influence, not because it is true, but because it is constant. The challenge is not the presence of noise, it is which voice you choose to recognize as supreme. Every day, multiple voices compete for control of your thoughts. Some come from experiences, some from expectations, some from disappointments, and some from imagined outcomes that have not even occurred. These voices rarely whisper. They insist. They interrupt. They exaggerate. If you allow them to dominate, they shape how you interpret reality. What you repeatedly hear begins to feel like truth, even when it isn't. There is a difference between volume and authority. Loud voices are not always right. They are simply persistent. Fear often shouts because it lacks substance. It relies on repetition to maintain influence. Truth, on the other hand, does not need a scream. It remains steady, clear, and unchanging. Learning to distinguish between the two is essential when pressure intensifies, when circumstances speak. They often focus on limitation. They highlight what is missing, what is delayed, what went wrong. They tell you what cannot be done and why now is not the right time. These voices push urgency without wisdom. They pressure you into rushed decisions and emotional reactions. Without discernment, you begin to mistake urgency for necessity and reaction for progress. The loudest voice is often the one that feeds emotion. Emotion amplifies perception, making small problems feel massive and temporary struggles feel permanent. When emotion takes control, clarity diminishes. You begin to react rather than respond. The mind becomes crowded and peace feels distant. That is how confusion takes root, not through chaos, but through unchecked influence. Choosing which voice to listen to is an act of discipline. It requires intentional focus, especially when distractions are constant. Silence becomes uncomfortable because it removes stimulation. But silence is often where clarity begins. When you slow down long enough to quiet the noise, you discover that the truest voice is not frantic. It does not rush you. It does not condemn you. It directs without pressure and corrects without crushing. Listening to the right voice does not mean ignoring reality. It means interpreting reality correctly. You can acknowledge difficulty without surrendering to it. You can recognize uncertainty without being ruled by it. When truth guides interpretation, circumstances lose their power to distort perspective. You stop reacting to what you feel and start responding to what you know. The volume of fear increases when it senses hesitation. It tries to fill every mental gap with worst-case scenarios. It thrives on imagination disconnected from truth. When you allow fear to narrate your future, hope weakens. That is why it is essential to interrupt fear's narrative. You do not do that by arguing with emotion, but by anchoring to truth that remains consistent regardless of circumstances. Clarity does not arrive through louder thinking. It arrives through focused listening. When you prioritize the right voice, confusion begins to unravel. Decisions become calmer. Responses become measured. You gain the ability to pause instead of panic. That pause creates space for wisdom. Why? Stone brings peace, even when answers are incomplete. Over time, choosing the right voice reshapes your inner environment. What once triggered anxiety begins to trigger awareness. What once overwhelmed you becomes manageable. You stop being led by noise and start being guided by truth. The storms may continue, but their ability to disorient you diminishes. Your inner world becomes ordered, and order produces strength. When the right voice leads, fear loses credibility. Circumstances lose dominance. Confusion loses control. You move forward with clarity, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer confused about what deserves your attention. Standing firm is not a passive posture. It is an active decision made again and again under pressure. It means refusing to surrender ground even when progress feels slow and resistance feels strong. Many people assume that movement is the only sign of victory, but stability is often the first proof that victory is already working beneath the surface. When you remain in position despite opposition, you are declaring that the pressure does not have authority over your direction. There is a difference between standing still and standing firm. Standing still is rooted in fear, but standing firm is rooted in confidence. It is the confidence that says you will not be rushed by panic or intimidated by delay.
You understand that not every season requires visible advancement. Some seasons require strength to be built, resolve to be reinforced, and character to be established. Standing firm allows that internal work to take place without interruption. Many battles are lost because people abandon their position too early. They misinterpret delay as denial and resistance as rejection. But resistance often appears precisely because progress has already been made. The pressure you feel is not always pushing you back. Sometimes it is reacting to your forward movement. Standing firm prevents you from undoing the progress you cannot yet see. Victory does not always announce itself loudly. Often it moves quietly, rearranging circumstances, aligning opportunities, and shifting perspectives long before results become visible. When you stand firm, you give victory time to mature. You allow what is already in motion to reach completion. Impatience interrupts that process. Consistency protects it. Standing firm also changes how you view fear. Fear loses its power when it realizes you will not obey it. It may continue to speak, but its influence weakens when it no longer controls your decisions. Each time you refuse to retreat,
fear's authority diminishes. Over time, what once intimidated you becomes something you recognize without reacting to. There is strength in knowing when not to move. In a culture that celebrates constant motion, stillness can feel unproductive. But strategic stillness preserves energy and sharpens focus.
Standing firm keeps you from wasting strength on unnecessary battles.
You stop reacting to every distraction and remain anchored to what truly matters. That focus is a form of wisdom. Standing firm requires trust.
Trust that the foundation beneath you is secure. Trust that you are not standing alone, and trust that movement will come at the right time.
Trust stabilizes the mind. Without trust, standing feels unbearable. With trust, standing becomes sustainable. You no longer measure success by speed, but by faithfulness. Victory being in motion does not mean the battle ends immediately. It means the outcome is already being shaped. You may not see the shift yet, but the resistance you face is often proof that something is changing. Opposition does not fight what is stagnant. It responds to movement. Standing firm keeps you aligned with that movement without forcing it. As you stand, your confidence grows. Not confidence in circumstances, but confidence in your ability to endure. Endurance is a quiet form of victory. It proves that you are not dependent on ease to remain committed. That independence from comfort strengthens resolve. You become less reactive, more discerning, and harder to discourage. Standing firm also influences those around you. Even when you say nothing, your stability communicates strength. Others notice your composure under pressure. They notice your refusal to panic. That silent testimony carries weight. It reminds you that your perseverance is not only shaping your outcome, but also reinforcing your identity. The longer you stand firm, the clearer it becomes that victory is not something you chase. It is something you allow to unfold by refusing to quit. The ground beneath you becomes familiar. The pressure becomes predictable. And what once felt uncertain begins to feel assured.